Welcome back to the show, everybody. Dana, how are you today, Dana?
I'm doing good. I'm cold. It's finally getting cold. We had overnight lows in the 40s, which is so great for sleeping. But I forget how all winter, like for months on end, I'm just cold all the time. Unless I'm not, then I'm boiling hot and ripping off my clothes from menopause. So one or the other, nothing in between.
Yeah. I was gonna say, like, this weather is always great because it's like sweaters and jackets.
Yeah, that is
which I love.
Fun. Yeah. I love that cup because it looks like your drink is floating in midair. So
yeah,
cool.
I don't like condensation.
Oh,
so any cup that I drink out of like this, it's always double walled because I don't like. So it's a real pet peeve of mine for my drink to condensate,
drink
and sweat onto things. It's like it's a thing. Yeah,
my wife uses cozies on all of her cans, so it's like the same thing. So
that's a weird ism for me. Which, by the way, a lot of people. Oh yeah, okay, yeah. You segue?
I was going to say the segue is we were talking about this the other day. Remember when we used to have to go to stores all the time? Like if you wanted to buy a double walled cup, we'd have to go somewhere to get it. Now you can just go on the internet. Everything's on the internet.
I know.
Everything's available for you to look up on the internet. And so the segue is we're going to talk about learning about your neurodiversity from the media. So whether it's the internet or TV or videos or wherever you're getting your information from, it's the information age after all. Yeah. You can go on an AI site and ask it to tell you, what are the true symptoms of autism in adults, and it'll give you stuff that you maybe can't find anywhere else, which is really interesting. But I think this topic came to us because of you and I have both seen videos, maybe from different disciplines, but people talking about self-diagnosis, and just because you've learned about something from the media doesn't make it a thing. And I vastly disagree. I think that the thing that's so great about the media now and information that's accessible in that way is that you are getting lived experiences from other people. You had mentioned Trevor Noah talking about his ADHD, right? Yeah. So for him, he's telling people, this isn't the end all be all for everybody, but this is how I experience this. And someone else might really be able to go like, oh my God, he's totally nailed what I can't say. And I had someone ask me on TikTok just yesterday, what do you look for as an assessor when you're doing autism assessments with adults? Because I don't do kids. And it isn't, no longer is my answer like, oh, I'm looking for diagnostic criteria, because I'm not really. I'm looking more for the lived experiences of it. And my categories may sort of match, about stimming and sensory sensitivities and different ways of thinking and obsessiveness and anxiety and everything else that we tend to put along with that. But I find more and more people are, one of the words I find myself using over and over again in my assessment reports is so-and-so presents well-informed. And it's because people are doing their own research. They're saying, this is what I think is going on, and here's why. Not just like, oh, I heard about this thing called autism or ADHD, and I think I might have it. They're coming to me and they're learning about themselves in those ways, and they're able to have the language for it. Like, I'm aware that I mask, or I'm aware that I stim, or I'm, I think it back to my childhood. Oh, I used to do that too, and I had totally forgotten about it, and this other person was talking about it. I think the naysayers who want to keep the old guard and the colonized version of I'm the expert don't want people to do that. Anybody who gets hung up in there, I'm right and you're wrong, is someone, in my mind, flags go all over the place. Someone should want to collaborate with you. And if you say, I learned this thing on YouTube, I don't really care that it was YouTube. Tell me about it. Tell me from your experience why you resonate with it. How does it operate in you? That's what I'm most interested in, because I'm not assessing people on YouTube. I'm assessing you, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm also, I think this is why we're seeing so many, myself included, late diagnosed folks. who we weren't diagnosing this in kids with adult low support need. How I was as a kid was not being looked at as autism at all. It wasn't even, learning disabilities weren't even really a thing when I was in school. So folks that are getting diagnosed later, I always sort of laugh when someone says, I'm 28, I'm late diagnosed, which technically you are, because you're not a child anymore. But I'm like, I've got you beat, 53. But that sense of how do you learn about those things through the media and people talking about them. And that's not to say there's not misinformation out there. There is. You have to be aware of that. But if you come to me for an assessment and you say, I heard this thing, and I might say, oh, I've heard that too online. It's not really something we look at, but I'm not going to just dismiss it and say self-diagnosis or self-wondering about it is not okay, right? Now, can you diagnose your wound that you have as a staph infection? No, because unless you have access to a microbiology lab and you're taking swabs and you're growing it in an incubator and you're seeing that it's Staphylococcus aureus, you're not going to be able to do that. So I think that there's a line somewhere between clinical medicine and what we're talking about. But even then, my physician is really good about working collaboratively with me. I can do research on other things that I suspect, and she'll say, well, let's do some testing. And most doctors aren't like that. So I think there are a lot of professionals out there that really kind of get bent out of shape when someone comes in or is learning about themselves from media. And I include all forms of media in there. It's really weird. People get really freaked out. Some people get really freaked out by a client coming in thinking they know more about themselves than this person has just met them do. It's very weird. I don't get it.
I mean, that's like a red flag for a provider, right? Like if in my mind, that's like a very ego-driven provider. Like I'm right and I hold all the knowledge. I think what's so challenging, like if we capture the nuance, because I think we oftentimes talk about nuance because these issues are complex, right?
Yeah.
There's a reason why we have a DSM, right? A diagnostic manual, because we do need some sort of framework for how to think about things. I get that.
Yeah.
I get that we need rules and laws. I get that we need institutions. Like we understand, like while it might not be fun to work through a bureaucracy or other things, it is there to establish trust in an institution in which we can then, I think, have conversations about the nuances. But without that, then what happens is it goes back to like, I say I'm right and you're going to listen to me kind of thing, right? So all that being said, there's more information out there than there ever has been, right?
100%. Yep.
And not all of that
accessible
information.
Yeah.
Right. And not all of that information is correct.
Right.
But what I think is the most important thing is how a person bumps up against that information and the insights that they drive from it. And sometimes a professional's job is to ask the right questions to drive the insight or to connect the dots. So they might come and say, wow, I've been on TikTok and my feed has been full of adult ADHD or adult autism or whatever this is. And it's like, why do you think so? What is resonating with you? Let's talk about that. And that's the job of a provider, I think, like a clinician or a doctor, right?
Yeah.
It is to provide that framework to say, how are we going to drive some insight and take the information and critically think about it versus it just being resonant. Like, I'm glad it's resonant, but why? Like, why is it resonant with you, right? What is the insight you're driving from that? So it's like a good and bad thing, I feel like. But I think it's been a great vehicle, for conversation.
Like you couldn't even, before the internet was a thing, you probably could go to the library and check out a DSM. I wonder if you could. I don't know if you could.
Well, I don't know.
But nowadays you can search any thing, and it may not be from the DSM people because they're pissed about it because they're losing money when people can just look stuff up online. But you can find reputable sources that'll give you the criteria for any given thing, and you can read it. Sometimes what happens is, like you and I, when someone is an expert in a particular topic, let's say, we know how to kind of interpret what's said in there. We have training and we disagree with some of what's written in there. But we can sort of say, based on what you're telling me, it does fit in this category of what's in there. Like you said, it's a descriptor of the general idea of neurodiversity. And do you fit within that? Versus, I have this rash on my palm and it must be skin cancer because that's where my mind goes with it. This rash that I've had off and on for about a year, and I even asked my doctor, she's like, well, it's probably just eczema. And I've never had eczema ever. And I've had myself convinced that it's some sort of rare skin cancer because it's where my brain goes. She says, yeah, but when you put cortisone cream on it, it goes away. And I was like, yeah. She said, the cancer doesn't go away. And I'm like, okay, good point. I actually figured out, it was around the same time I got a new laptop, and it's contact dermatitis from whatever's in the laptop. So I got these little covers for where my palms rest, and it stopped, right? So, yeah. But it's a good example from like start to finish. If I looked it up and I'm looking at pictures on the internet and I go to my doctor and I say, this looks just like the pictures of skin cancer on the internet.
Yep. Yeah.
She's going to not laugh at me. She's going to be like, let me look at those. Oh, okay. And then she's going to do some exploring. Like, what have you done? What have you tried? Has anything changed? Are you using new detergent? Yada, yada. You go through all those things. And then, yes, I put cortisone cream on it. It makes it go away. Aha, it's inflammatory then. We know it's something inflammatory, which is not going to be cancer. Those are the kinds of things like she's trained to know, to go through and sift through and get to the bottom of, right? And a good doctor will do that. They're not just going to have you show up and say, it's not skin cancer, don't worry. There are doctors that will do that. And then you leave and you're worried. She will tell me why not to worry. She'll explain it to me because she's awesome, right? Not everybody will do that. So you and I will work with folks and we'll say, you come with the stuff you've learned, tell me about it. If it's in there, if it's in there, if it's in there, if it's there. Interesting, this other one though, what's the scoop with that? And maybe they're not describing it in a way that fits, or it really is just a thing that isn't necessarily tied to neurodiversity. Before we went on, we were saying remembering names is hard. It can be hard for anybody. There's memory things and a bunch of stuff we could talk about, but it's not unique to being neurodivergent. So we might say that's not necessarily a neurodivergent thing. And that sort of is our job, to be able to sift those things out, right? But it doesn't mean what you're finding on the internet is you shouldn't do. And you shared a video that you'd found where this person was kind of naysaying that, to which I wholeheartedly disagree. I think I like clients to come well-informed. I want them to be. Right.
It's almost like doing a due diligence, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think finding the truth is hard. Like,
right.
You can find crap. Like, you can find pure fiction easily. That's easy stuff. The truth, though, you need to work for. And I think that's like something, and whether that's the truth about a situation or the truth about yourself, there's work that needs to be done. I mean, you do need to research, you do need to think, and so I do think that, we really, there's, what I don't like about social media is that there's so much coming at you so easily that if you don't have a good grounding of who you are, where you are, how you're affected by that flow of information, I can absolutely see how that can influence someone's thoughts and opinions. I mean, I think we're kind of seeing that today, just in the world, right? There's a reason why we've got the highest amount of teen depression and anxiety than we ever have. We have a mental health crisis at the teen level. That's really connected to social media, right?
And just the constant bombardment of stimulation. There's never downtime.
There's never downtime, and there's never quiet. There's never the ability to, and what do we do in therapy all the time? We really drive self-reflection and introspection. This is something that, is the bread and butter of what we do. We might come to it in different ways. Like, I can't come at it necessarily through just plain talk-based therapy, right? We talked about this in a previous episode, but we might come through it in different ways. But ultimately, we have to trust that that person knows deep down that this makes sense to me. And sometimes that takes structure and some quiet and some good question asking, that kind of stuff. And that I think that there's some benefit there are many benefits to formal diagnosing. So, if you don't need to be formally diagnosed, let's say, formal diagnosis, why is that beneficial? Well, because of our systems, you get more support, more services,
School and work.
Right? Right? So, but sometimes for some people, I think that external validation from an expert is very freeing
really
and comforting
affirming.
in its own way. Right?
To get out of that imposter syndrome thing that I continually still, like, what the hell? When is this going to go away? It's never. I'm a woman with a bunch of minority labels, and it's just in some way going to be there forever. I'll never have the swagger of a straight white rich man. It just isn't possible. It's not. I can't do it. Right? Someone that has all the privilege variables, but it is that sort of idea of working with someone collaboratively who can help you see things in a way that works, right? So I'm thinking of my own therapy. When I first got into therapy in my very early 20s, I had 2 years in my very early 20s that I was just completely anorexic. And my therapist didn't address it directly. I was in therapy for like 3 or 4 years after I had already put on some weight because I started doing triathlons. I still remember the session. I went in there, I'm like, was I anorexic? And she just sort of smiled and she says, yes. She said, I didn't confront it directly because you weren't in a place that she deemed was going to be dangerous. And she knew at that point in time, if she addressed it directly, I was going to run, right? Because it was how I was controlling and having any sense of efficacy in my life was be able to do that. And then, working on my stuff is what sort of alleviated that on its own, right? So that was something as an expert for her, knew that the timing had to be there and so on and so forth. And that's sort of our job to do that, right? That sense of what you bring into therapy, you're the one bringing it into therapy, right? You're the expert in that way, and we want to work with you. It's not about us saying, oh, it's about your mother, the Freud thing that the public has such a weird take on. I really love that MSNBC has had the series called My Generation, and they have one a week. The first one started out with boomers. I'm technically a boomer because I'm born in the last year, 64, that they say are boomers. But none of my informative years were in that time. I always identify more with Gen X. Mm-hmm. So they had boomers that had Gen X, and then yesterday they had millennials. And that was really interesting to me because I sort of know what boomers, because my parents and I have a little bit of that, and certainly Gen X, I'm like, that's me. To learn about millennials, one of the things they talked about was they were the first generation that had this constant stimulation and how fried they feel. And these unique sort of ideas of, that lived experience of being that age, right? Growing up during those times. And to me, I'm like, oh, this is so cool because it's like the context for people that I know that are in that age. We don't grow up in a vacuum, right? We grow up in these things that are informative processes and so on. It's like the last generation that learned if you work really hard in school and go to college, you pretty much kind of give an okay life. And then beyond that, not so much, right? But that's sort of what we're looking for too, is what pond are you in? And my experience, and this is probably for you too, when people come in and they've had that aha moment that they might be neurodivergent, whichever it is, there's more of like I finally understand. And you see that cascade of those things happening and everything sort of clicking into place. That's what's so great about the media. That's what I think is really a useful therapeutic tool. And I'll tell people, go find stuff on YouTube, watch this, watch that, see if you resonate. Not everything you're going to yoke with, but see what you do and write down what you do resonate with, and then let's talk about it. So we used to call it bibliotherapy, where we'd have people go read stuff. It's like media therapy. I think that can definitely be a thing too.
Yeah. And I think the difference there, Dana, is that you're using media as a tool versus being enslaved by it. Right. So like that, exactly. Those are two different things, right? Yeah. And that you're intentionally going there with a purpose, looking for something versus it just kind of being on your For You page coming in your feed and just doing whatever with it, right?
Yeah.
But
I grew up at a time where we were bored, and that, so I knew what that was like, and I have some new compassion for folks that didn't grow up having times where they were bored. Now I understand sort of that, like you're talking about, that constant bombardment, and I'm like, well, just stop looking at it. It's just not that easy. Yeah.
I mean, this is a whole different maybe conversation,
That's
but
true. Yeah.
this is the response. I mean, I think that there's partial responsibility that must be taken by the software people.
Yeah. It sounds like Instagram's doing that. They're putting team controls on finally. Yeah.
I mean, like, you're making a program that is keeping people beholden from a minute standpoint on your platform. There is some responsibility that must be taken, I think, in that situation.
Yeah.
So that's just that's a more, I think, maybe philosophical, moral, ethical kind of ethical. It can also be a better word.
The negative edge of media, right? That you want to be careful about. That's definitely exists. So we're not saying it's all good. There are some evils to it, if you will. Right? It's
like use media in a mindful, intentional way, I think is what, I love your recommendation here, Dana. Go listen to actually, you know what? I've got a few videos of people talking about their experience as an ADHDer or an autistic, right? Watch that video and write down what resonates and write down what doesn't. Like, be like, no, that is not me at all. Write those things down, you know, and bring them back and let's have a conversation about it, right? But what's missing, I think, a lot of times, especially with adults who are getting diagnosed as autistic or with ADHD as adults, because we see this as childhood disorders. I have my air quotes up, you guys, because that's, you know, I'm just using the terminology. Right? That, no, of course you can't have this in adulthood. And I think the reality, though, is that you've always had it. You just never thought about it within that context or that frame. And by us talking about lived experiences as adults, that's when you go, oh my gosh, yes. Yes. And this is why. So Dana, for S&Gs, you like S&Gs?
What's S&Gs?
I'm not going to say it because I'll have to edit myself. But if you know what it is as a NeuroMarvel, you can type it to us. What do you think an S&G is? Okay, I'll tell you after. Okay. But I put into ChatGPT this prompt. Ready? I'm an adult who thinks I might be autistic. What is the criteria to diagnose autism in adults? This is what I wrote in ChatGPT.
Yeah.
This is what Chat has to say. The criteria for diagnosing autism in adults are generally based on the same guidelines used for diagnosing autism in children, though the presentation might differ because adults may have learned to mask or cope with certain traits over time. The diagnosis typically follows the DSM-5 criteria for autism spectrum disorder. Here's the breakdown. Okay. Gets into core areas of difficulty, and really it's really verbatim. Kind of verbatim what the criteria is. Blah, blah, blah. Social communication, social interaction, repetitive patterns.
To sensitivity is repetitive, blah, blah, blah. Okay.
So we have that. Additional considerations. Symptoms must have been present in early childhood. While the challenges might be more obvious in adulthood, there must be some evidence, even if it's through reflection or family history, that these traits are present in childhood, even if they were less noticeable. This is really interesting.
That's
2,
really good.
Symptoms cause significant difficulties in daily functioning. Right? How the diagnosis is made. An adult autism diagnosis is often a multi-step process.
Cool.
Clinical interviews, standardized assessment, observation, the clinician's observation.
Yep.
Collateral information.
Yeah.
So Chat GPT is doing better
It's
than
getting
70%
better.
of our colleagues.
It actually, because a year ago, it was like all the doesn't make eye contact. And this is what I've learned actually, because ChatGPT is learning. That's what makes it artificial intelligence. So it's getting better. Plus the fact that probably 99% of the people that have created the AI are autistic. So they know, right? I mean, seriously, come on. I've worked with tech people in Seattle for 24 years.
Oh yeah.
Easily 95% of them are somewhere on the spectrum. Yeah. That's great. It's getting better. Yeah.
It's getting better. I mean, so the big thing here is do you have to get a formal diagnosis? It depends. Can you self-diagnose? It depends. It's the answer that Dana and I always give. And it's, again, we can't just be categorical about this. That's the problem with the DSM. You are diagnosed through exclusionary criteria.
Right.
Or inclusionary criteria, but really to the exclusion of, then you're not, like, whatever.
Yeah.
So because this is such a nuanced and complex thing, we can't come at it that way. Right. So my answer is it depends, or it's a combination of, but ultimately, please get with a provider who is willing to listen to your lived experience and is actually demonstrating curiosity about your lived experience now and how you were as a kiddo, maybe. And what, like, they're curious about what brought you there in the first place. Like, why even ask these questions in the first place? Help me understand that. And that, if you have a therapist, like, help me understand this. I want to know why. Like, that's where you need to be. Not a
usually it's like, I've always felt like an outsider and an alien, and maybe this is why. It's never like, I had a great childhood and was everybody's best friend, and I don't even know how many friends I had, and I was a cheerleader, and this is so great. And it's not typical. It's usually feel like the outsider.
Yeah. It's so interesting because my clients lately have been really challenging me. They've been listening to the podcast and they're like, your description of yourself is funny. And I was like, what are you talking about? They're like, you said you're neurotypical. You've lost your mind. My clients are saying this to me. I was like, why? They're like, you don't think like a neurotypical person. Like, get out of here. So they're literally calling me out. My clients calling me out on this, which I'm laughing about. And it's funny because as I was listening to, I've been going down the rabbit hole of like listening to Trevor Noah. I was telling Dana this, who's come out as discovering that he has ADHD and that his depression was has been very connected to his ADHD. Listening to him talk about his lived experience, and he's so articulate. I'm like, what's so interesting is I can really, the way he thinks can really really kind of resonated with me in some of the ways that I myself function. And it just made me laugh because I'm like, oh boy, here we go.
I love that. Here it comes. So, it coming back to you.
It's coming back to me. So it's like, I don't know if I should mostly neurotypical, kind of.
Well, my wife's the same way. She has sensory sensitivity. She has things like, she wouldn't like sweat on, and I think it's one of the reasons we get along so well. Is she ADHD? No. Is she autistic? No. But she will embrace the label now, neurodivergent of some kind. Like even if it's in sensory stuff, or both of us absolutely love routine. She hates not having routine, but she just doesn't fit the MO for like a diagnosis. So you can be somewhere in there without it sort of flipping the switch for an actual diagnosis, for sure.
Well, and I guess and so that difficulty of what to call this, right?
Neurodivergent.
Is the reflection of the problem with our category, our diagnostic system. That's the problem. It's dichotomous. When I don't feel dichotomous. Right.
Exactly.
I feel very like esque-ish, kind of. Oh more on that. Right. So what do we? What do we call that? And maybe like if you're listening to maybe the 11 of you now. And we've got our good old steadies. Shout out to Steve.
I think we have more than 11. Just I want to say,
I don't know, but what should we call that? Like, what do we call that?
What's interesting to me is it's sort of, something that came to mind for me though was sort of, it is like the disorder, the level of pain that it creates. Is it such a big part of your life that it causes problems in almost every area of functioning versus not? Like my wife will still go do things that I'm like, I am not doing those anymore. So that's a good example, a good difference of that, right?
Yeah.
Maybe
you just
I'm thinking about even EDS. So you can be somewhat hypermobile, but not fit the full criteria for EDS. So you're not ripping your ligaments when your ankle twists like mine did and had to have it reconstructed. It doesn't mean you're not stretchy, but you're maybe don't have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. Do you know what I'm saying? It's somewhere in the same pond, but not the disorder. Right. That's how I see it. But
we're waiting in the shallows. Exactly. Dana, you just articulated why I've hesitated to even call myself neurodivergent. And it's because I feel like I don't deserve, quote unquote, that diagnosis because it doesn't affect my life.
Yeah.
It doesn't disrupt my life. Yeah. With the level of across everything all the time. It's just
neurodivergent isn't a diagnosis. It's
correct.
A label. It's a spectrum. So I've had people say that I'm definitely neurodivergent, but I'm not ADHD or autistic or OCD, but I can and that's how I would characterize my wife actually. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. For sure.
Yeah. So, well, let us know in the comments if you guys think I should then rechange our I mean, then I'm going to have to change it all. I'm going to have to, I got to change the bio. I got to change the opening sequence. I'll put I think it's a psychologist, a neurotypical, and a neurodivergent. I don't know.
Neurodivergent-ish. Or maybe we have to have a whole thing on explaining what we mean by neurodivergence. Right.
Yeah, maybe the slide, the opening slide should be neurodivergent or neurodiver, and then just put it, and then I'll be like esque-ish.
There you go. You could have
we'll do something ridiculous like that, and that will be fun.
That.
Yeah. Okay. That will be.
We should do an episode on the various drop downs. That'd be fun.
That would be really good. Yeah. All right, everyone. Well, wow, Dana, you and I were windbagging this one for a while.
We had a few things to say. I guess we had more to say about this than we originally thought. Yeah.
It's always fun. I'll just say that I always feel so grateful that, I get to do this with Dana. It's so much fun. I look forward to it. I wasn't feeling well and I wasn't willing to give up our taping session because I was like, no, but I look forward to that.
Me too.
And then I go back and I do edits and I'm giggling it's because some of the things that we say are ridiculous, and I'm laughing and it's just so nice to be able to do this. I mean, Dana and we're going on our 100th and something episode. Yeah. And it just doesn't even feel like it. Like it just, it's just something that's become into our routines, I think. And it's such a great way for us to connect and share some of our musings with y'all. So thank you for being there, NeuroMarvels. We appreciate you and we love you and we will catch you in the next episode. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.